Does your job, or perhaps more specifically your boss, ever make you feel like your opinion doesn't matter? And it leaves you with a feeling that your only option is just to put your head down and just do what you're told? If this resonates, let's take a look at some of the root causes, the implications of feeling that way, and what we can do about it in order to address this pandemic of depressing disengagement and dissatisfaction in the workplace. First is it just you, or is it bigger than you? A little bit of good news and bad news. The good news is that no, it's not you. It's just you. You're part of a majority of the workers in the workplace, and that's the bad news. It varies by generation. The generation that does best, that scores the highest as far as engagement and job satisfaction, is the baby boomers, and they score at a pathetic 33%, and the rest is much worse. So we have a real pandemic. One of the things that I've observed is that in workplaces where the leadership is referred to as the bosses, it's like my boss told me, my boss said, my boss was, and I never hear the person's first name. I always hear my boss, my boss, my boss. Those workplaces tend to be the worst. Um, and interestingly, leadership also in those kind of environments tends to complain a lot about, I mean, express real frustration that they end up hiring all the people who just simply don't have passion for their jobs, who don't show any engagement, who don't show any ownership and accountability for the work that they do. Interestingly, they always ask, what can we do to improve our hiring practices? You never hear, what are we doing to create an environment that results in this kind of thinking and this kind of behavior? That's very interesting. And I hope you've never had to deal with this. This is something that was more common in the at the end of the 18th century and the beginning of the 19th century in factory environments, where people would literally be told, "We pay you to do, not to think." Again, hopefully you've never heard those words, and I wouldn't be surprised if you have felt that way. And there's a reason why you feel that way if you do. There's something that's triggering that. And what's behind it is waterfall. For all of its advantages and benefits in delivering high efficiency for simple and complicated work, there is a cost associated with that, and it is this engagement. It's definitely part of it, and there's a reason for it. It doesn't happen just accidentally. It's part of the structure that it follows. Consider that in the simplest way, we can define waterfall in many different ways, but I mean the simplest way, just for discussion right now. Consider that waterfall has three main big periods. There's the period of requirements gathering, figuring out what needs to be done, and coming up with a plan to deliver to those requirements. Then we move on to that's done, that's over. Throw it over the wall. Next is executing the plan. It's implementing that plan. Because this is waterfall, it's a single pass system. So there is no going back and revisiting. Going back and revisiting is very costly. So when we think during execution time, we introduce the risk of derailing the plan. That's why it's discouraged. That's why we don't want to hear during implementation somebody coming up with an idea and an observation, because that puts the plan directly at risk. And that could have significant financial and delivery. It's going to threaten the delivery of whatever work has been committed. So there's a reason for it. There's a reason why project managers who are tasked to make sure that that doesn't happen, they, I would hope, would never tell people those words is like, I don't want to hear what you're thinking. I just want you to do it. However, through their behavior and how they manage through these challenges, that's effectively what's being communicated. And people hear that, whether they acknowledge it, whether they're aware of it or not, we see evidence that that's exactly what people are hearing. So when you have a work environment that, with all good intentions, and I'm sure that the people genuinely don't want to communicate that, but the structure that they're following is communicating, don't think, just do, well, that's exactly what we end up with. We end up with an environment where the workforce is not engaged in thinking because they're completely discouraged from doing it. And to be fair, I have seen it many times when people during execution have raised concerns, have highlighted things that they're seeing in the implementation that are problematic from their perspective. A majority of the time, those concerns don't lead to a revision of the plan. Many times, what's happening is that they weren't aware that during the thinking phase, somebody did see that scenario. And it was just labeled an edge case that could be ignored from a business perspective because it wasn't deemed to be particularly important or difficult. It's those rare exceptions where something could come up that hadn't been considered, that hadn't been seen before, that could be dangerous or potentially unethical. Those are the ones that really need to be explored and considered. But the environment, the culture, because of the process that's being followed, discourages that kind of thinking. I've mentioned in other videos that our brain has a way of filtering things that we consider undesirable. It's a reticular activating system. And unfortunately, these kind of conditions can fall into that. And that's what can lead us into just simply not wanting to see, not wanting to look, because we're conditioned. We know that there isn't a reward to thinking. On the contrary, there's going to be a lot of strife and a lot of struggle if we speak up, if we say something. Is there evidence that indeed this is the dynamic that's going on? No. Is it really the case that people feel and expect that somebody else might be doing the thinking, for example, that they don't have to do the thinking? Absolutely. This is actually one of the challenges that we run in Agile implementations, where people initially, when we come in, they're already feeling overwhelmed. They already feel that they're doing way too much. And then Agile comes along and says, oh, and by the way, we're going to empower you to make the decisions, come up with the plans. This is your baby. You're going to do it with all the best of intentions. And what people hear is that, great, at least before somebody else needs to do the thinking and I could at least focus on getting the work done. Now, on top of getting it done, I have to do the thinking and come up with a plan. There's a real resentment that arises, which confirms the relationship that has been established between those who are doing and implementing the work and those who are figuring it out, which is the structure of waterfall. So what's at stake? What's at stake? What are we looking at? What does this all mean? The numbers from 2024 are showing us that the result of employee disengagement translates into close to $9 trillion in global economy loss. 9% of the global GDP lost because of employee disengagement. That's huge. And then you have to consider what happens when we introduce AI, where AI is all about complex work that requires everybody to be heavily engaged in thinking, to make those real time decisions at this accelerating speed that AI forces us to work at. In many ways, I see the past 20 years of Agile implementations as the dress rehearsal to what's coming up with AI implementations. And it's the reason for my concern, because what I observe is that we have not properly enabled the workforce to be able to deal with this high level of complexity as we're entering into an area where it's essential. It really is required in order to make good decisions. We're going to find ourselves in situations where people are so conditioned to just do, execute, execute, not think, that they're going to see, it's going to flash right in front of their eyes, things that are problematic, things that are unethical, things that are dangerous. And it's just going to happen. Not because they're bad people, not because they're not intelligent, but because the environment has conditioned them not to think about it and take action. So the good news is that we do have the tools to be able to deal with this. And we need to have those conversations about changing our company's cultures in order to support healthy engagement, healthy thinking, healthy involvement, so that everybody can be paying attention as we're doing things. And then we can make good decisions and good implementations. And that requires changing our culture. And in order to do that, pick one of these and I'll tell you how to go about taking the next steps.